Chris, do we know if Tom's going to get up this weekend?
Yeah, he'll play, unless something that we're not expecting happens in the next 24 hours or so. But no, he was. I think I was clear last week that he was very close, which gave us supreme confidence that he'd be okay, and nothing changed in his training early in the week to alter that thinking. So he'll be right to go. Sean Manor will come back into our team. So a little bit longer than I would have liked personally, but as we often do, we sort of tend to be a bit cautious in that return to play phase. But so he'll be a good addition for us.
What about Jack Henry? Sorry, leave the track earlier. It looked like he was having attention out there.
No, he's fine. So I'm not exactly sure what his program was today, but as you know, it's pretty very individual for us today. So what was he? I think he was on a table there at one stage, was he?
Yeah.
Standing off. He wasn't engaged in training. I was going to check.
Neither was I, obviously.
Yeah. I was going to say, is that the same situation with Jack Bowden as well? Just having different...
Yeah, I'd strongly encourage you not to pay any attention at all to what you see on this day. I don't know anything about Jack, but I guess if we were going to hide something from you, we wouldn't put him on a table. But I don't know how to explain it any better. It's just that we have a lot of guys sort of doing their own program, and I'm not across it. But by now, if there was a problem with Jack, I would know about it.
Yeah, it's more just to clarify. Shannon Neal as well.
Yeah, go through every player on the list if you want. Shannon's okay. So he had a little bit of an ankle tweak last week, but was able to play out the game and actually pulled up really well. So he trained well yesterday and more than proved his fitness then. Then that's probably the other thing. Just let's help you through our program a little bit. The captain's run day does become a bit more individual when we've trained the day before. That's not always the case. So the guys would do more today if we had have trained on the day earlier.
So just sorry, go back again.
This is riveting stuff.
Jack Henry is on the table. We saw him, and we also saw him exit the cafe a lot earlier than anyone else has left.
Yeah.
So from your side of things, he's going to play.
Yeah. One day you'll ask me a question, and for some reason they won't play, and you'll say you misled us. It's just a very individual day. So, can I do any better? Is it? No, Jack will be right. Stuart will play. As is, again, it's a little unusual today, and that normally we've named a team last night, so you can I appreciate that gives you a bit more clarity. So given that lack of clarity, because we only picked the team at 6 o'clock tonight, Mitch Nevitt won't play. He's had a little bit of a foot issue, so we want to get that right. Other than that, we've just got a few things that we need to work through to be perfectly clear how we're going to go. But the two that I've mentioned coming in are certainties, and Nevitt's the only one we know for sure that's going out at the moment.
What were the circumstances with that issue there, Chris?
Mitch's foot?
Yeah.
He's just had this little plantar fascia issue. It actually wasn't the reason he was a sub last week. And the way it's been explained to me is they would like to get on top of that, especially given the fact that he's a young developing player and it's early in the season, rather than having him push through. So it's frustrating for him because he would be in our 22, and it's something that I'm sure he feels like he could push through. And if we were 3 games from the end of the season, he probably would, but we don't want to do that in round 4.
Is this a game where you sort of maybe look to Reece Stanley, someone who traditionally matches up okay against Max Gawn? Yeah,
we won't this week, but it's definitely on our minds and getting closer.
Are you slightly do you have the optimistic view that okay, you've lost the last 2 games, that you've not played at your best, but you've almost pinched some of those matches, or both of those matches? Would that be a fair way of looking at the past 2 rounds?
Yeah, and even if you include the first round, we had a really good win, but we had a patch there in the third quarter where we weren't great. So that's probably a reasonable way to explain our start to the year. It's been pretty good, just not good enough. We think we'll get better, but it's a really difficult competition, and I think it's just going to be a challenge every single week. So trying to strike that balance between fixing the stuff that needs to be addressed, but also not overreacting and sort of almost having this sort of self-perpetuating negative cycle. Well, we're not going terribly. I mean, I could make the case that Melbourne aren't either, but that doesn't, that's not going to get much support. But early in the year, one, it's difficult to get a line on teams' form, but it's also difficult to get a line on the teams that played. Like, for all we know, the Gold Coast could be the best team in the comp. Like, I think you could make a strong case that that's true. That sort of puts their performance last week in perspective. But again, these are easier sort of positions to form in round 16 than it is going into round 4.
What do you make of Melbourne from what you've seen? Besides kicking more goals, how do you beat them, do you think?
No, well, I mean, I'm going to be repetitive. I would suggest this year, because I just look at every team and see how good they could be. And my view on Melbourne kind of hasn't changed that much through their ebbs and flows. Their best is really hard to stop. It wasn't that long ago that you were sort of thinking, okay, they're the best team in the comp, but it's just going to change a lot sort of over the years. Their personnel's daunting at times, and it's just poor policy to be looking at a team thinking they've got some weaknesses that are just going to persist. I think we've already seen it with teams this year. You have, just to pluck one, like Collingwood didn't look great in the second half, round 0, but they looked pretty good the next week. Win by 90 points, and it's like, if you draw too much from either of those performances, you're likely to be wrong.
Is the midfield where the challenge lies with a team like Melbourne?
Yeah, probably. I mean, Gawn's been such a good player for a long time, and Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, they're mainstays of what has been one of the premier midfields in the competition. So, I don't think that that's changed that much. They're all still really high-level players, and again, I'd give you a better answer if we had 2 months of exposed form, but we have no choice but to sort of assume that their best is really difficult to stop, so we need to be sort of on our game. And I think I've said before, like, we're not a team, haven't been for a long time, that's just like, we just play our game and it doesn't matter who we play. No, we're really thoughtful about the opposition and the threats that they present. So there are some things that are slightly more important against Melbourne than, say, the team we play next week. And I think it's reasonable to say a lot of that does revolve around their midfield strength.
Do you have a firm point of view on the Ryan Mansell decision? Do you believe instances like this makes it harder to coach?
Makes it harder to play. Maybe the instruction becomes a little bit harder. I haven't got a firm view on it. These things are challenging, and I think, again, it's okay to accept that these things aren't black and white. I think the most reasonable position is to recognise the difficulty in assessing these things. Like, to take a really strong position either way doesn't recognise that complexity. So when I look at the replay, and I do think that looking at slow motion replays can be deceptive. And anyone that's played the game at the top level will say that. What you see out on the ground in your perspective just doesn't reflect what you see in the slow motion vision in the comfort of your lounge room. But when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's probably not a free kick if the other two players don't impact that contest. So it seems to me what they're saying now is, and they've been quite clear in their communication, the AFL, that the push in the marking contest will be adjudicated as it always has. The added wrinkle is if you push someone into a contest and they get hurt, you could be liable for rough contact. So the implication there seems to be that you need to know that someone's coming the other way. Now, I think that's hard, and I can't make an assessment as to whether Mansell knew that or not. But what I would say is, if that was just a one-on-one contest, I'd be staggered if even a free kick was paid. But now he's the victim because that push resulted in severe contact from a big key forward coming the other way. So the coverall from the prosecution, if you like, is pretty powerful. It's like you're liable for the outcome in these situations, and more we're seeing that. If you choose to bump, you're liable, even if it's a head clash. So you can execute a bump perfectly, shoulder to shoulder, but if there's a head clash and the guy's got a history of concussion and doesn't cope very well, and he has to be removed from the ground, you're going to get a minimum of 3 weeks. And then they say, well, the bump's not dead. Well, it's like, well, okay, it might not be dead, but now it means you need to be very, very careful, because if there's any serious impact to other players, your duty of care to him will have been breached. I think we understood that more clearly when we're talking high impact, high velocity bumps. Now we're talking little nudges. And I think the other point, I was told, I didn't hear Patrick Dangerfield talk about it, but the way it was relayed to me seemed to make a lot of sense, in that sometimes in these situations, all similar sort of situations are considered to be the same, and that's a really dangerous place to get to. So I would use the example of Darcy Cameron nudging Briggs into Sam Taylor, opening round, Collingwood, the Giants. I don't think in any way, shape or form that is reportable. It's not even a free kick. But if that application that we're seeing now, that, well, if you nudge someone and he gets concussed, that you're liable, then I'd probably challenge whether we've got to the right spot on that one.
Is it unfair to change the rules, so to speak, a couple of weeks into the season? Like, should this have been a decision, right, for next year, this is how we're going to adjudicate it? Rather than, as you said, Darcy Cameron gets off with it in, so to say, in round 0, but then in round 3, Mansell now misses 3 weeks.
Well, I mean, I'd probably just, if you don't mind, just reframe the question a little bit and say, is it just that Richmond have their number 1 pick concussed in the most egregious of all these examples, from a push into a marking contest, fractured jaw, concussion, misses weeks, a couple of other similar incidents, let go, and then the one time that Richmond pushed someone into a marking contest, he's the one that gets 3 weeks. So if I was Richmond, I'd say, well, there's no justice in that at all. But what's the counterfactual here? We say, no, we're not going to change the rules mid-season, and 15 players get concussed because now it's like open slather on pushing guys into the marking contest. I would counter that. No, that's exactly the role of the AFL. They've got to adjust to the evidence as it becomes clear. Now, they're not Nostradamus. They can't be predicting before the season that all of a sudden players are going to be pushing players into the marking contest. And I just don't think we could point to any examples really of that being a trend. But as soon as they identify it, I think it is their responsibility to say, we're monitoring it, which is what they did. They communicated that. They said, the push is going to be adjudicated as a free kick, as it always have, but there's this extra wrinkle that if there's a concussion because you push someone into a marking contest, your duty of care has been breached. So I think that's pretty clear. In practice, really, really difficult in the moment for players to adjust to. But I think there's one thing that we respect about the players, and it's more the players than the way it's coached. They are adaptable and they can change. So yeah, I would just counter by saying, yeah, on face value, you prefer not to have rules change during the year. But you shouldn't just put your head in the sand and say, our hands are tied until October. Is that fair? Yep.
On other footy topics, what do you make of the stuff happening over West? Oscar Allen, captain of the club, meeting with the senior coach in the early parts of the season. So
I was briefed on this. I'm not across the detail. I might need you to fill in a few gaps that we couldn't fill in. Is it well known that he met him? Did he meet him in public?
He's met with Sam Mitchell.
How does anyone know that? Is that well known? These are serious questions. I just want to because I don't want to comment expansively unless I know a few situations. People know. Yeah.
Oscar Allen's doing a press conference.
Yeah. Because, the question I would ask is, every situation is unique, and Sam was an assistant coach there and clearly has a relationship with him. It seems to be the suggestion that not only does everyone know for sure that they met, but they seem to know what was spoken about. Now, is that on public record as well?
Well, I'd like to think so, given that Oscar now has to come out and address the situation.
So what if he says, what are you talking about? He's an old coach of mine. He was in Perth for his bye. We caught up for a coffee and spoke about chipping technique.
Then we will know that in a couple of hours.
But yeah, so
is it a good look, would you say, though, for a captain?
Well, I sort of rail against this idea that we need to modify all our behaviour because of the perception that other people dictate. So, one, grow up. Like the old timers who just can't bear this stuff that opposition teams could be talking to their teammates, and now the narrative seems to be, as it's been related to me, well, we all accept that it's okay and that it happens, except if you're the captain, then you can't do it. Well, that's a nonsense as well. So is it a good look? Well, the people that don't like it, I reckon, don't really understand the system that well. And I would counter that if it was so important that this conversation needed to be had, they would probably be a little bit more guarded about it. I tend to... Like, Oscar Allen's a free agent at the end of the year. Like, there's not one club in the competition that hasn't spoken about him. Now, has their head coach spoken to him directly? Probably not. But if I had been the assistant coach at West Coast, I probably would have spoken to him. Yeah. Now, is it a good look? Oh, I would kind of say just get with the program a little bit. But it's probably good fodder, isn't it? Like, it's interesting to talk. I haven't heard everyone's comments, but I would sort of argue that anyone who played footy before 2000 hates it, and anyone that started playing footy after 2010 is probably okay with it.
From your point of view, maybe a couple of years ago, given Danfield's age, and that's no disrespect to him,
Yeah.
but if...
Is it possible?
You said it, not me. If he was meeting with another senior coach and then walks in the four walls and you hadn't known about it, would you have been comfortable with that?
Well, do you want me to give you a real world example?
Yeah.
Tyson Stengel met with Ross Lyon last year. He's a free agent. Is the expectation at our club that Tyson comes to me and says, "Oh, Chris, is it okay if I..." No, of course not. You're an individual, and we accept that it's happening. Now, our preferred model is that we can speak to whichever players we want, but no one's allowed to speak to ours. But we just can't get everyone to agree to that. So I would argue that the people that have the biggest issue here and are trying to project their difficulty of these sort of situations based on their experience in 1987 aren't really reflecting what and how the players of today actually operate. Like, I think we don't give them enough credit for their ability to walk and chew gum at the same time. So if, I would sort of counter, and I probably shouldn't talk about West Coast players, but any West Coast player that's got an issue with Oscar Allen should grow up. But sorry if that sounded harsh.
Chris, a special night for the club tomorrow night with the 100th anniversary forward and the motorcade and stuff like that. Even preparing for a game of footy, but it's just a nice moment in the club's history.
Yeah, it's great. Like, even having anytime we get the past champions back's a good night for the club. I think that it happens a lot. They just sort of sit in the crowd, largely anonymous, but the chance to sort of see a lot of the guys, doing a lap of honours cool. I ran into Tom Hawkins before. It brings back good memories and it's good. I think it's good for them, but more importantly, it's good for the supporters. I think the American sports do that brilliantly. The esteem in which they hold their past champions is something that I think maybe we could do a little bit better, as an industry. So yeah, it'd be good to see it. Obviously, we're sort of a bit separate from it, but it's not really for us. It's for the fans, and I know I've been talking to Hawke. He's really looking forward to coming back and supporting the people that supported him so well for so long.